And hello again, welcome back to the stream. It's your host Marley Startled, and today we will be talking about D-Days and how they work and things you need to take into consideration when doing D-Days and the benefits and difficulties that occurs when trying to achieve a D-Day. So first things first, what is a D-Day? So a D-Day is effectively the Allied invasion of the Northern Europe. It can occur really anywhere, but normally occurs in this region near Cherbourg and Dieppe, and largely in Brittany as well, because of course of how easy it is to cut off enemy troops. Very rarely we see naval invasions here, but you can get them to occur because of the air tile there, which makes it very difficult to get a superiority. Reasons for D-Day is really to get the Allies back into Europe, to push in and begin relieving pressure off the Soviets. In most multiplayer games, the D-Day will normally result in the end of the game with a Germany player conceding, because D-Day is so difficult to achieve that if you can achieve it, then you're more than capable most of the time of continuing to push and breaking out and moving through France. Of course, that's one of the benefits of D-Day, is of course the breakthrough and the division, but of course the issues with a D-Day is it's very time consuming. Unfortunately, as the Allies, it's probably the most hardest faction to play as in terms of actual winning, because unlike say the Germany or the Soviets, who have a much more centralized power and centralized specialization, like Germany being able to do tanks, infantry, mass production of air, and so on. The Allies do not. They have a rather wide display of small specialized nations. For example, you may have the armored Canada, you may have the Marine Australia, the Air Controller UK, and in consequence, that means if everyone's not pulling together, you eventually end up really struggling to achieve a D-Day, because a D-Day is actually very difficult to achieve in most multiplayer games because of the complexity, and it's really rather unfair, I would say, in some regards, because it's very difficult for the Allies to achieve a D-Day, but very easy for the Germans to counter it. So one of the big issues is it takes a lot of coordination to pull off. The second is it needs all the stars to align. You really need to be good at the game to achieve a successful D-Day. You need to understand the mechanics, how they work, how they function, the importance of air, the importance of hardness, breakthrough, and all that lovely stuff. If you're quite a new or casual player and you try D-Day against a rather experienced player, we won't stand a chance. Also, there's a lot what that can go wrong with D-Days. From the initial landing without air support or naval support, to the actual initial landings where you're still trying to take ports, to eventually the exploitation of lots of little things going on, which is unfortunately the issue. So when should you D-Day? Primarily, there's sort of two time periods you can do a D-Day. 1941, towards the end of 41, you're normally going to do a rush D-Day, where you know that Germany's quite weak, he hasn't got a lot of troops, perhaps he's not a very good player, and he's not garrisoned properly. Normally he's actually lost North Africa, and maybe lost a lot of tanks. Another reason for a rush D-Day might be because the Soviets are collapsing too quickly, which is very difficult. Which is really very bad, because you can't rush D-Days. D-Days take a lot of time, a lot of coordination, and are very time sensitive. For a rush D-Day, you normally won't have the best equipment for it, so it'll be something like these sort of units, Marines, with a lots of artillery for that soft attack, and hopefully if you have rocket artillery, something like that, something for breakthrough, but most of the time you're not going to be able to afford the research and rocket artillery. And so you'll need something with large soft attack, something with a high degree of combat width, and very marine based to land. Rush D-Days normally don't work unless against very bad Axis players, and it's normally out of desperation that you do them, so they probably aren't going to work that well. Desperation, or you know that the game's too much won because of Germany's lasers pants. A second sort of D-Day, a late D-Day, is a bit much more harder to achieve. But normally you'll have a lot more allies to coordinate and has a higher chance of success. This is when you've been building up slowly, you're taking time because your allies are just all over the place, or you're taking a while to get that air superiority, and you're just wanting to make sure, and you know the Soviets can hold and potentially counter push. The key issues with a late D-Day, sort of a mid or late 1942s, is that you're really, some would say you're almost on a soft time limit as the Allies to achieve a D-Day because of the German org wall. So we talked about roach builds and org walls in the previous video. Primarily the Atlantic wall is a roach build slash org wall where there's put a load of crappy units on, and when you try to attack they'll constantly reinforce them with garbage troops, meaning that eventually you de-org, and in consequence you fail to push the enemy off the position. That means, of course, you want to attack on as wide a front as possible. It can be very bad to attack on a narrow front. So, for example, if I only attack these 2 tiles, the Germany player could just keep on adding more troops to Cherbourg, more troops to this tile, and even if I did get a landing, there'd be tanks right behind it to contain it. And so it's very important that you do try and attack across a wide front to maximize that combat width, maximize those penalties, and prevent the Germany player from being able to consistently reinforce every part of the line. I would recommend probably D-Day in Brittany or Brest or Lorient because of the nearby proximity of dockyards, whereas this is quite a risky one. You can see there's there's almost 3 parts of the coastline that is completely without supply, without ports. I mean, even if you do land here, you run the risk of being cut off and killed. So, when I say why D-Day is so difficult to achieve, is of course it takes so much coordination and so much time to do. Let's say, for example, a lot of Allied players don't really understand what the role is in the game, especially if they're trying to play to win. They'll spend too much time faffing around in North Africa, or they'll commit too many resources to Japan. Most games aren't won in those theatres. It's nice to hold or take North Africa, because that means, really, if you look at it this way, the rest of the game of the Allies is this preparation for D-Day. The only reason why you're actually bothering to hold this El Alamein is so potentially you can take the rest of this territory and then force the Italy player to garrison Italy rather than reinforcing the org wall up north. The only reason why you're actually protecting your oil, your rubber in the Pacific, isn't to prevent Japan winning the game. It's just to make sure you've got enough rubber to build enough air to get D-Day. So many games I see uncoordinated allies just faff about in these regions, putting too many resources in when it's not necessary, and it's sometimes deeply depressing knowing that you probably could pull off a D-Day, but no one is willing to coordinate to prepare for it. Let's say, for example, I've got my Australian Marine guy. He's too busy faffing around trying to, I don't know, naval invade the islands, and it's late 1941. By the time I say, okay, it's time for D-Day, get over here. That's if he bothers to listen. It'll take him, 2-3 months to get over here, and then it'll take him another 2 months, or another month or so to actually send the order and then prepare for the D-Day. Which meaning by that stage, by late 41, it's already early 42. And so it's very important that you have a set deadline as the Allies for D-Day. Everyone's in agreement. We will D-Day at this time. At this time, at this date, everyone's ready for it. No excuses. If you just have this sort of lazy we'll D-Day eventually, you'll end up with straggling units coming in and none of that organisation. And so it's very important that you have a strict timeline for D-Day. We will D-Day at the start of 42, or we will D-Day by mid-42. I want all units on the UK in preparation for this D-Day. So what obviously moves through North Africa? It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. South Africa will have its tanks up there. At this stage, the game's already won or lost. So what if Japan begins to take British Malaya by late November 42? At this stage, the air war should be enough in your favour that even if they did take the rubber reserves, the Germany player is not going to have enough time to build up his air to counter you. It's all very important on coordination and making sure you prioritise D-Day. Just when you go to bed at night, you're thinking D-Day. When you're hugging your Bob Semple Wafu pillow, you're murmuring D-Day into its ear. As the Allies, your main focus, because what wins the game is D-Day, and everything else is preparation for it. Everything else. Only faff around in North Africa if you know you can win it quickly, or you know you've got time to do so, to buy time and the USSR is able to hold long enough that D-Day for you to take North Africa. Only way about the Pacific. Actually, don't even worry about the Pacific. Half the games, the Japan players just trying to faff around with the British RAR. Very rarely we actually bother doing that. And if you just have naval bombers around these regions, very unlikely for the Japanese player to really successfully do any effective operations in that sector. So what I'm really just trying to say is, as the Allies, have a strict deadline for D-Day, make sure everyone is playing their part for it, and get everything in perspective. You know, North Africa's fun, but it's a waste of time after a certain time period. After, I'd say, start of 41, the end of 1940. If you haven't really achieved anything decisive at the end of 1940 or the start of 41, then you should move away, because the start of 1941 is where the momentum shifts to the Allies going on the offensive with the Operation Barbarossa, meaning that Germany's interests and attention be moved elsewhere, and a lot of the time, a lot of Allied nations will be too passive. Allied players will be too passive. They'll be used to reacting to the Germany player, and in consequence, when it comes around for them to actually do something, they don't bother doing anything. And that's the key issue of the Allied nations. It's that you have lots of different nations or lots of different players, and you need all of them working together. And all it takes is one or two players not to play the game properly, or just to do their own thing, or not to really understand the mechanics, and you're done for. So coordination is key for a good successful D-Day. The second thing is air superiority. So as we mentioned earlier, you need the Tacs to break down the enemy naval, or the naval forts that the Germany player may build. You also need your CAS to break through the org wall as quickly as possible. So if you do not have air superiority for a D-Day, you're probably not going to achieve a D-Day. That means air is very important for the Allies. So mass production of air, a very large proportion, I'd say almost 100 factories in 539, and potentially even more as the USA. And because you normally have the UK and the USA build, and the UK will normally put 50 factories on there, and the USA should probably be putting about 100 on there as well, so they can eventually win the air war. Once it gets to say mid to late 1940, you're switching your production away from air now, so you're putting about 50 factories on air, and then you're focusing on other things. Because without air, you will not achieve a D-Day, because you're going to need that CAS to break through, and you're going to need the Tacs to wear down the positions. Another thing is that a lot of Allies players made the mistake of not trying to wear down the German Air Force. They'll just keep their Air Force, their airplanes out of the skies, and then D-Day occurs, and then then they say, okay, we're going to D-Day. Then the Allied air controller sticks to air over Western France. First, this is a big red flag for any Germany player or any Axis air controller. As soon as they hear that airplane noise and see that red over Western France, they know a D-Day is coming. So immediately the warning flags go up. They'll put their unmolested air up to contest, and they will start moving units to counter you. Whereas if you've got your air constantly up, then they'll never really know when a D-Day is going to happen. Second thing an Axis player may do, or Axis team may do, is they may only bring up their air in Western Europe once they know a D-Day is going to occur. So they'll just keep their air down, and then once they hear the naval invasion warning, the air comes up. So, and because the air hasn't been unmolested, there's only so many airfields in the UK and in France. You will still end up with contested air, even though the Allies have got more reserve air in the bank. So that means you need to be constantly drawing the Germany player to throw away its air via attrition if need be, and you can do that via logistics bombing or strategic bombing. Now, strategic bombers are normally banned in multiplayer games, so you probably have to use logistics bombers, or logistics bombing with CAS, or you're probably going to need to use TAC bombers to do strategic bombing. Both of which will start damaging trains and start damaging the airfields. And if you're damaging trains, as with CAS, then Germany player will have no choice but to bring their air up to challenge you. And if they don't bring up their air to challenge you, then you can just keep whittling away on their air, on their trains and wearing down their supply. So that's why in this demo you're going to see a lot of CAS, like 2,300 CAS, because I can't get the Allied UK to move its air off anymore. So what next thing you need is going to be decent units for D-Day. And so here we're going to talk about our unit designs. So here we have our Marine Brigade. It's got lots of soft attack, not a lot of hard attack, okay, not very good breakthrough, and okay organization. It gets a plus 43% attack on in amphibious landings, but here's the big problem. The mechanic I haven't talked about in the Roach build video is a mechanic called hardness. So this fellow here. So units are made up of hard units, or divisions are made up of hard units and soft units. Your soft units being your infantry, your artillery, maybe support companies, and your hard units being mechanized and tanks. How hard your unit is will then reflect on what damage you take, whether it's how much is hard attack and how much is soft attack. So if we take a look here, you can see this is almost 100% soft. That means 100% of the damage taken, 100% of damage this unit will take will be from soft attack sources. So if we take a look at, say, this unit has a soft attack 151.2. That means my Marines will get 151.2 damage maximum capability, and it will get 0% hard attack damage. That means that when you're against an org wall, a standard soft Marine build like this will eventually quite easily get worn down by these nibbling attacks from all this soft attack infantry on the German coastline. So this is good against weak D-Day walls for rush D-Days, but very bad against hard or reinforced positions, which is not good. Alternatively, if you can wait long enough and you've got enough time, you can do a more mechanized build. So here we have amphibious tank battalions and Amtrak battalions. Now, as you can see, these guys have 67% hard attack and 32% soft attack. Now, we could probably even up this up some more. I can't because I can't afford it, but I will later. This to demonstrate it. But in any case, but that means that 67% of the damage it will take will come from hard attack sources, and 32% of the damage it will potentially take will come from soft attack sources. So against soft units with like infantry, it's going to take a lot less damage from org wall roach build soft attack units. But it will take more hard attack damage from, say, tanks. However, in most multiplayer games, tanks will be banned from ports because there's very few naval invading units that have enough penetration or enough hard attack to push a tank off a port. So in most decent multiplayer games, tanks will not be allowed on ports. And if they are, then you know you're in a bad game. You probably shouldn't play it if you're playing as the Allies, because they'll have high hard attack and you won't be able to have enough piercing or enough of your own hard attack to push them off. So we have a unit with high hardness, and that means it should hopefully overcome the soft attack, the soft units in most Atlantic walls. We also have a large amount of soft attack, a pretty healthy amount of defense, and an okay amount of breakthrough. Now you're going to need a lot of breakthrough to sort of overcome the enemy's pushes. And you're going to need a pretty large amount of soft attack to kill as many units as quickly as possible. If you don't have enough soft units to attack as quickly as possible, then what's going to happen is you are going to take too long to push people off tiles or to actually get a landing. And that means the Germans will be able to reinforce and send more tanks in, or send some tanks in just behind the tiles, or potentially delay you and de-org you that way. We also have, of course, organization, which is pretty important, but not as important as these stats, especially when it's a hard attack unit, and so on. So let's demonstrate for you how a D-Day should occur. Actually, let's keep this going. I need these guys trained up. So here we have our two units. So we have our early D-Day Marines, and our late D-Day amphibious tanks. So our early guys, high soft attack, but they're very soft themselves. There's only one unit to demonstrate what will happen. And I'm going to make sure I've got everything in preparation for you. So I'm going to tag over to the UK. And I'm going to have the UK do some strat bombing for us. So this is why you need tac bombers. Now imagine these are tacs, not strats, because I didn't build any tacs myself. Because I couldn't be bothered really, because I knew the UK would make them. But you do need normally a healthy chunk of tacs to wear down the enemy's ports, enemy's naval defences. So here we have our CAS, I believe. Yeah, our 200 CAS. 200 tacs or strat bombers wearing him down. Now if I tag back to the USA. So we've got our air superiority. At this stage we've achieved our air dominance. We've got 2,300 air. Actually I'm going to tag over to the UK again. And I'm just going to put all my air up. That's again to demonstrate it. Here you go. 12,000 fighters, 200 CAS. Air, 200 strat. And you might be wondering why these guys have so many planes. It's because I land leased it to them. We'll divide these up to about 100, because you really are trying to maximize all our stats here. And I need to tag back to the England and put at least some fighters on this. There you are. You've got no fuel, which is not good, so I'm going to have to make you buy loads of fuel for this. Yeah. Now we're good. So the next thing we've got our air superiority. We've got our marines standing by, and we're going to have naval. We're going to have some battleships standing by to give that minus 20% defense bonus to our troops, meaning that the enemy D-Day will be hopefully weaker. So this will be the stage where you're fighting over the territory. You're doing the air superiority to wear down the enemy's. Trying to wear down the enemy's. Coastal forts. This may take some time. Make sure my guys are actually just bombing the right things. Let's bomb that. Yeah, I was slowly damaging that coastal fort. We've already damaged 2 levels. There we are. So we've damaged 3 levels. We could probably try and do a nice little landing now if we wanted to. Now, hopefully this would be larger and natural. The reason why this is so low in my game right now is because I've wasted so much army XP on training up these marines for the demo. Normally I would save all that PP and I'd invest it in my doctrine some more, but because I wanted to show off both sort of divisions, I've wasted a lot of PP. So I've had to put PP in tanks, I've had to put XP in tanks, I've put XP in my marine units, I've had to put XP in my marines, which is not good. So here we have it. That should be a pretty good D-Day. Now this is what happens when you try and just use your Marine. So Marine tries to land. Immediately it doesn't do very well. It gets de-orged before it can actually push them off the tile. Or before the CAS can actually do anything. That's very problematic, and it's actually one of the reasons why after a certain stage, normal Marines just aren't going to cut it. So this is great for early D-Days with weak D-Day defenses, but it's going to be really bad late game because you're just not going to have enough. And even though these are cheap, you'll need some very specialized D-Day units to do a successful D-Day. So now we're going to delete this unit. And then we're going to just add a few more tanks to this. Bit more. Mm, 72% hardness. Happy with that.
Yes, sir.
The other consideration you need for a D-Day is how much damage it's actually going to do now. I'm just want to watch this, come and see how impressive it is. 600 soft attack, that's not bad. 578 victory, that's pretty good. 31 org, that's meh, but otherwise, yeah, not too shabby. Another consideration you need to make or take into account is how wide the push is. So in a perfect world, everyone's competent. You're going to have Brazilian Marines on standby, you're going to have Australian Marines on standby, you're going to have British Marines on standby, and you're going to have a general offensive across the whole front. However, in this example, this is just going to be the tip of the spear, the USA player doing an invasion on this perspective. Now, if you just attack a single tile or two tiles, it really does not work in your favor. The reason why is because if I attack only those two tiles, the Germany player can start moving the rest of its troops in to reinforce these tiles, meaning that eventually I'll probably run the risk of being reinforced memed or simply just being de-orged by the amount of troops on each tile. Also, it means that the Germany player can move his tanks down in reserve, so as soon as I land, he can right-click me off the tile. And so it's very important that you attack across a wide front, say, 1, 2, 3, this tile, this tile, this tile, this tile, rather than just these two tiles, so you can pin as many troops as possible and prevent that constant reinforcement. Another consideration is the risk of landing on non-port areas. If you try and land in, say, this objective or this tile, and there's no port, and the Germany player has a tank behind it and right-clicks you, you may just end up losing the entire unit. And so there's a lot of difficulties with D-Day. You're starting to see now there's lots of complexities behind it, and it can very quickly go wrong if not everyone's playing the game. Another consideration is that you can potentially trick the Germany player. You could do a diversionary D-Day, say with the USA player D-Daying here, and then once the Germany player starts moving its units to reinforce the sector, the Allies do a D-Day in this sector instead, meaning that you can, of course, draw their attention elsewhere. But the big mistake a lot of players make is they will put too many units on, like they'll put these 5 units to attack these two tiles. These two tiles are only 80 width, so I can only get 2 tanks at max on each tile, which means, of course, that they're not going to achieve anything of value. So wide D-Days are normally preferred or over multiple tiles. But the D-Days I tend to find are most successful tend to be at Brest and Lorient, because there's a large collection of ports on standby. This sort of D-Day area, not so good. Dieppe over here, potentially, but so potentially here's also a good D-Day spot because that's a nice lovely plain, but over here not so much because it's urbanized. This is probably a bit of a trick. You probably don't want a D-Day here in the slightest, so this looks good. But really, this sort of area has a nice D-Day spot, and this area here. So now we're going to demonstrate with our hard attack units. You've seen they've got 70% hard attack, that meaning they'll take very little soft attack damage. They've got a large amount of breakthrough, and they've got a large amount of soft attack. So we're going to now demonstrate what a D-Day would look like. Potentially, with those sorts of units now. So you're going to stack as much bonuses as possible. You've got your air superiority out, you've got your planes out, you're going to force attack, which is risky but necessary, and you're going to try and break through. You see these guys already breaking through now. If I was a Germany player, I'd be quickly reinforcing this. However, because it's over such a wide front, it shouldn't prove that much of a problem. And you've got to imagine on a wider spectrum you'd have the rest of the allies, you know, doing something of value, not just faffing about. So the first thing, you will initially get pinned at the start of this, which is bad, but the first thing you should be immediately doing is expanding out, using hopefully the Mulberry Harbours, which aren't that effective because they don't actually resupply you. At the same time, you want to be reinforcing, expanding forward if possible. And this is where the next DDay gets even more complicated. It's more complicated because this is another very dangerous time for you. Germany's got tanks, reserves, or spare tanks. He's immediately moving into clothes on you. You're immediately being pinned by enemy, by the units, by a decent micro Germany. And so this is a very vulnerable stage for you. You can see this didn't work, and this is very dangerous, this stage, so this is why you'd have a lot more allies on standby. So this is a very vulnerable spot, like really vulnerable. These Mulberry Harbours should be providing me with supply.
Orders.
And these guys haven't landed. So this would be a disaster, basically. You basically die here. I'm going to tag Germany in retreat and show it to you again. Preferably somewhere less idiotic. And this probably select a more optimum location for you to demonstrate the D-Day. But that Mulberry Harbour is not giving you fuel is idiotic, like really bad. Someone needs to pick, like Paradox needs to fix that. Like, what's the point of a Mulberry Harbour then? Tag Germany. Re-garrison. Okay, tag USA. And now let's try and do a demonstration on a much more, potentially more successful area to conduct a D-Day on. So let's put our 2 units to land with a Mulberry Harbour on here and here. Let's put our other D-Day units on this objective to do a D-Day landing here, here, here. So if you're going to go for a proper Allied D-Day, you're probably going to be landing pretty much every tile in this sector. Because if you can get to Rennes and you're in a very cushy spot. But this is a typical place where D-Day can occur. Because of how easy, because it's very easy to pin reinforcing troops trying to come in, and there's a lot of ports nearby to help you take the objectives.
Ready, sir.
So, once again, Panzer Armour,
Yes, sir.
Panzer Expert, and attack and attack.
Under fire. Keep on moving.
Force attacking. And the D-Day landing. So this is a very vulnerable position now for you. So you've got your landing, you've got your port. You can see this is a lovely plain, so actually this is probably a very bad place to attack because this is urban and this is urban. So this is a bad place for a D-Day. Dieppe is a good place for a D-Day because it's plains, Dunkirk's also a pretty good place for a D-Day, and Vlaanderen as well, because it's all plains, but this area is actually a bit of a mean D-Day spot because of the amount of port defences. Whereas here, you've got some forests, but for the most part, you've got plains as well. So here's a vulnerable position, because this is the next phase. What makes D-Day so difficult is that you've got your landing. Now it's about the exploitation, and for that you need to immediately start rushing troops over. So here we have our German. You tend to have, say, English cannon fodder or English troops as cannon fodder, and also you could use some of your troops here to do this as well. Now the issue a lot of Allied players will do is they will rush and over congest the ports, meaning that they will put too many units in these ports, and this will in these regions, and they won't be supplied, and then the units will start taking penalties, and these penalties will then allow the Germans to push you off to D-Day. And so you need to be expanding, take as many ports as possible, while also putting more troops in, while also not putting too many in to cause supply issues. So here we go. We're going to go free speed to demonstrate. So the first thing I do is I attack from the side. To expand out. Okay, and then I attack from this side. I don't attack yet because these guys are low supply, low org. Now I attack.
Yes, sir.
And I quickly begin to push out as quickly as possible, and I mean quickly as possible. Once the tanks are in, the game's won. Really.
Ready, sir.
And then you just need to quickly expand out.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
This is still quite a vulnerable spot for most D-Days because you haven't expanded fully.
Orders.
But you're rushing everywhere. You're rushing to encircle these, you're rushing to push over, to sort of secure this bottleneck, and so on. And that is when a D-Day is normally quite successful, because you'll have the UK sending in their troops, you'll be sending in some of your troops as well, and so on and so forth. But that's not enough to overstack you. Other considerations is once you've done the exploitation phase, the game's more or less won. If you say get to this point, the German player will normally just give up, or you'll be pretty happy with the end result. And once I do get a tank stack on, it's normally pretty good. Now the question you've got to ask yourself as a D-Day, especially as a USA, is what sort of units do you want? So you can see with my my amphibious tank chassis, I put a lot into medium howitzers for that extra soft attack. The only reason why I did that is because your main efforts should be D-Day. Just even this landing itself is an achievement into itself, and so I would tend to put more focus on soft attack just to land, and then let other units like my tank reserves or my allied tanks or allied troops and the CAS hopefully allow me to push over. Hopefully deal with the enemy tanks. I do have also my own tank units, but the problem with that is it's quite expensive, and it's May 1943, so this would be a very late D-Day, which is not very optimum, but you get your general idea that really mid-42, mid-42 at the latest, if you want to really pull off a successful D-Day. Otherwise you're going to have a bad time. And the regions where you want to be pushing is sort of in these open plain tiles where you can pin quite easily, and over, say, Dunkirk, Calais, where there's lots of plains and you're not going to have too many problems trying to expand out. This I wouldn't really go for because it's urban, so you're going to struggle, and Cherbourg, which you're going to struggle with as well. That's it. But the final demonstration we will do now
Listen up.
is what to do against a late,
Ready, sir.
against an endgame org wall.
Keep on attacking.
So I'm going to move my troops back out.
All in.
Put more research into this fellow. And allow the Germans to retake. This is probably not the most accurate representation, because you are going to have the Germany player hopefully countering you and trying to push you off. Well, now.
Attention.
Or rather, hopefully not, or rather unhopefully trying to push you off. And then I'm going to show you what a late game org war looks like. So a lot of players will say that a D-Day is on a hard time limit or a soft time limit, because after a certain stage, if the German player knows what he's doing, or he's snowballed enough and he's not being pressured enough, he can do something like this. So let's imagine this is like on the whole front. So imagine that the entire way around, he's got like 100 divisions, 164 divisions, probably double that, just all on this wall. This is when you're going to have a real bad time, and this is when normally you're not going to be able to achieve a successful D-Day, simply because we know where to push unless you go for nukes or something like that, and you just won't be able to stack enough damage or enough breakthrough to get through this crap. I'm going to move this tank off because, again, no tanks on ports. But let's just demonstrate to show you how awful a D-Day can be if you wait too long, and how almost impossible it can be.
Yes, sir.
So once again, same as before. I'd even say not attacking urban tiles during D-Day, just attack the planes, because the planes you can actually push. Because urban tiles, you get penalties attacking with tanks, and you also get penalties, and so it's going to be very difficult to push through and quickly take. So whereas the planes like Dieppe, although they've got weaker naval bases, they're going to be a lot easier to take and allow of expansion. I mean, look at Dunkirk. That's a level 6 naval base. That's level 3 naval base. You just land and quickly advance into Lille and Ghent and all these other planes. So this is probably a nice healthy spot for a D-Day to occur there, and a slightly more optimum spot there for the different regions, being that you can pin a bit more.
Orders.
So, my boys, you shouldn't be there. That's the wrong thing. Try again. Now I know already a lot of people are going to be saying this is a late D-Day, and you are right. This is a very late D-Day. So I'm going to simulate what a late D-Day will look like. This is probably my own fault, simply because I didn't maximize my industry, my research. I was too busy trying to just faff about in the USA, and I thought, you know what, let's do a D-Day walkthrough. And so this is probably a bit too late, unless the USSR is doing absolutely godly. Hopefully you're going to be land leasing or that sort of thing, but it's just a point to consider that 43 is pretty going to be in a struggle bus unless the Allies are modernizing and also going amphibious. If they're not modernizing or going amphibious, then what you're going to end up with is, normally a lot of Allied players will start leaving Allied miners and that just means a recipe for disaster. Once again, let's try our D-Day invasion.
Come on, move out. Ready to move.
And it's almost hopeless. You can see by the amount of org. My guys are going to be starving before they land. and this didn't work. And that is a good example. I just wanted to show you guys a good example of what can happen if you don't D-Day, if you don't prioritize your D-Day and you're not strict with it. You can eventually get to this sort of stage where the Germany player's got hundreds of divisions, and the Italy player's got hundreds of divisions, and you just cannot break across because you just don't have enough units or enough Marines or enough breakthrough to do it. And so it is quite a soft time limit for D-Days. But primarily you want either an early D-Day to prevent this build-up, or a mid sort of 42, late 41 D-Day to allow your own breakthrough to occur before you get to that critical mass. You are on a time limit for D-Day, so there's not a 100% guide to achieve D-Day every single time. You are on a hard time limit, and if you do not pull it off after a certain date, you're probably never going to pull it a lot off unless you've got, say, nukes. Other things to consider: if you're going to be the USA player, you're going to need to make a lot of crap troops. The reason why you make a lot of crap troops is simply because you can then increase the special forces cap, meaning that if you increase the special forces cap, you can have more special forces. You can then use these troops for garrisoning, say, Japan, and potentially exploiting on D-Day just to fill up the lines. But that's effectively a guide to a successful D-Day and things to consider. To summarize, you're going to need coordination from the allies. You're going to need, against a good D-Day wall, hard attack units with high breakthrough and high armor and high soft attack. You're going to need air superiority, and you're going to need to concentrate throughout the entire process. You're going to need to pick your landing sites. You need to be thorough, and you need to be maximizing as many bonuses as possible, including crypto, which you should have some guy like the UK doing crypto to give you the bonuses to offensive actions. If you're going to go for a rush D-Day, then Marines will fly soft attack with some decent org, and if you're going to go for a late D-Day, but not too late, mind you, you're going to go for something with a high hardness to overcome that. Once you break through, you're going to exploit, take more ports, and do the best you can. Try to take planes, and try to avoid attacking on too narrow a front. Make sure you coordinate with your allies, and make sure, for the love of God, they're all understanding the main aspect of the allies is to D-Day. And if they can't D-Day, then if they're not unwilling to do that, then you're going to pretty much lose the game in most cases, unless the USR's God tier. Next time on, we'll talk about the USA. There's some I don't play it very often, but there's things you need to consider as the USA. We'll show you my build for USA, but primarily it's the D-Day first, being the main priority. That's D-Day, D-Day, D-Day. It's all the only thing I care about. Sometimes I will just make nothing but Marines and make no tanks, and just use the air and the Marine armor just to land, and then hopefully just by landing I can achieve a victory. But in any case, that's it. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions or pointers or things you want to bring up, feel free to do so. I do try my best to respond to YouTube videos or YouTube comments. As I say, I'm not the amazing god tier gamer, but I just understand the mechanics of certain things you need to concern yourself with. And there's some considerations for the future reference of what you may want to be doing and may want to be sort of prioritizing in your builds. But in general, air superiority, coordination with allies, strong units with high breakthrough and high org and high soft attack, and making sure you exploit and you pick your terrain thoroughly once you land. And you should hopefully achieve a D-Day, but I will have to say that D-Day is one of the hardest things to do in this game, and the Allies is probably the hardest faction to play as, and the USA is in fact a very hard country to play as because you've got all these sort of obligations and things to do. However, this is very bare bones. I'm not going to bother showing you doctrine or tech, anything like that. Oh yeah, I'll show you my tank tech, but bear in mind this was a pleb. This was a real pleb build, so you don't even need to research this. If you're just going on previous D-Day tanks, this was a waste. This is something you just give to your tanks to like your other tanks to make them better. Heavies, I probably spent too much research on this, and for my amphibious tank chassis, I went with medium howitzers for the soft attack. and okay armor. What I probably should have done is gone with more breakthrough, like the auto loader, and smoke launchers for that extra breakthrough. Oh no, this fellow here. There you go. And now if I equip this instead, I would now have a armor with 600 breakthrough, which is pretty good. And not too bad in the hardness front over. Anyway, that's me done for the day, boys. Yeah, other considerations. This was pants because I built too many units to try and demonstrate this demo. And I didn't optimize my build. This is pants as well because you've got to consider that you're not going to be doing a lot of air research as the USA, and you're not going to be doing a lot of research in terms of planes as well, because you'll be using production licenses and you will be probably just researching one or two of these things. So air, have tacs for the naval forts, have CAS for the soft attack, have fighters for the air superiority, and really that's all I'll have to say. But thank you all for watching. I hope you have a good one, and I will see you all later. So adieu.